So I want to welcome everybody to Financial Support for Aging Adults, and this presentation is being sponsored by the Concord Quarter Working Group on Aging Concerns. And I don't know if anybody here, a lot of folks here know what that group is, but I'll just say we've been an official group of Concord Quarter for over 4 years. Evelyn Brownlee of Wilmington Meeting is our clerk. And if after tonight's presentation you want to get involved in that working group, feel free to contact Bianca Santini Dumas. She's up there in the corner. I think she's in the corner in everybody's screen, but she's our coordinator. So you can get to her by emailing concordquarter@pym.org. And just a little bit about information about us. We've done a number of presentations, some live before the pandemic and some on Zoom. We've done presentations on staying safe as older adults, housing options in your later years, organizing for life and how to deal with the clutter that we've all accumulated. We've done a presentation on hospice care, and we had a Aging Concerns Facilitators Weekend at which George was involved, in which a number of us were trained in aging concerns issues. So we also have on our website, which is at concordquarter.org/aging concerns, we have a PDF on a checklist that you should actually look at, because it gives you all those issues which we have to be aware of as we get older. And it's a checklist like, doing your will, finding a person who's going to be your medical, somebody help me with that. The
Power of attorney.
Yeah, medical power of attorney and all those other things. That's up on our website. We also have a senior residence worksheet in Excel. So if you want to make comparisons between the various fees between senior residences that you're looking at, then you could actually go and get that Excel spreadsheet. So, and also a good summary of what our group has done is in the July 2021 Concord Quarterly Meeting newsletter, which was an article written by Lynn Pearsall. All right, now I want to introduce our presenter tonight, George Schaefer. He is PYM's Care and Aging Coordinator. And as many of you know, the PYM Care and Aging Program provides pastoral care support and practical guidance to individuals, families, and meetings in the manner of friends. Now, let's see. As PYM Care and Aging Coordinator, George conducts retreats on topics of aging and consults with meetings and individuals on issues of aging, as well as helping provide PYM financial support to friends of modest means. By profession, George is a licensed social worker specializing in the area of aging and behavioral health. Before he joined the yearly meeting in 2009, he was a assisted living administrator, a licensed one in Pennsylvania, for over 20 years. So we have a person of great experience to give us this presentation tonight. I regret, not that George regrets, but I regret to inform everybody that George will be retiring at the end of this year. That's right, George, right? On December 31st? You're going to make your escape, and we are going to miss you, as I hear many, many people said at the continuing sessions last weekend. So, George, we really appreciate you being here. Just briefly, this event grew out of a concern of a subgroup of ours just dealing with senior residences. And we realized that various senior residential communities require a substantial buy-in and monthly fees that can be enormous. And we thought it valuable for friends to hear if there were financial aid supports for this kind of move. We also are interested in finding out if there's assistance for people who wish to age in place. So with that introduction, George, I'll turn it over to you. And just remember, folks, you can put questions in chat and I'll monitor it during that time.
So as Rich said, I am the PYM Care and Aging Coordinator, and I am looking forward to my retirement at the end of December. But I am, I will be around, and I will certainly be available to consult with people. And, I'm a member of our yearly meeting, so I'm not going very far. And I will be serving yearly meeting as a resource friend in aging. So, so you could readily find me if you need to. Um, so tonight we're going to be talking about the funds available through the yearly meeting to support long-term care. And there are a few funds at yearly meeting that are utilized by friends who are uh, in long-term care. And I want to stress that most of the applications that come through that I deal with, another point of interest is I am the point person for all of the applications that come to the granting groups that provide the grants for aging friends. When we talk about aging friends, we're talking about friends 60 or 62, depending upon the grant and the fund. So 60 or 62 and over. So that's what's classified as an aging friend. For the most part, we're talking about members of the yearly meeting, although we'll talk about the Greenleaf Fund a little later on. And that is unique in that it allows for persons who are in sympathy with friends. So that's a phrase, and we've defined that very carefully. It also allows for those to be considered in sympathy with friends who are relatives of members of the yearly meeting. So the Greenleaf Fund, and I'm going to, as I said, I'll talk more about it, but the Greenleaf Fund is the major source of funds available to aging persons in our yearly meeting. There is another fund called the Aging Granting Group, and that is a granting group that administers many different funds that have been established. The joke is that Quakers don't endow stained glass windows or candlesticks. They create funds for purposes. So the yearly meeting and even my meeting, and I'm sure maybe your meeting, have many little funds. So the Greenleaf is our big fund. It has a corpus of about 12 to 14 million. Its income is about $500,000 a year. And thus far, we've probably distributed since 2009 when the fund was established, $2 million to various friends. So I have a presentation, and I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm going to screen share right now. Okay. So PYM financial support for aging friends. And again, in my role at yearly meeting, and in yearly meeting, what many people are not aware that the yearly meeting is a granting institution. We give away millions of dollars a year in funds. I mean, not only for aging, but for other things. So when friends think about the yearly meeting, yeah, there's the program part, the part that supports annual sessions and the work that I do. But then there's a whole business office that administers and makes sure that funds are distributed to friends who are applying for grants. And we have a huge grant making apparatus, and the granting committee of yearly meeting oversees all the various granting groups. Just put that out there. Because sometimes when we look at the budget of yearly meeting, we're thinking, wow, that's a big organization. But we do serve as almost like a philanthropic organization for the various funds. Most of the funds that are invested in endowments are held by Friends Fiduciary. Okay. Now, there we go. I'm trying to advance my slides and figure that out. Here we go. So the reality and the denial of aging. And, the reality is that due to medical advances, we're living a lot longer. 70 to 80% of us will require an average of 2 to 3 years before our deaths of assisted care, long-term care. And I'm going to get into what, we're going to break out that term, long-term care, into its component parts. And the reality is that most of our medical expenses will be used in the last 2 years of our lives. So as I mentioned earlier, the majority of friends that apply to the yearly meeting for help are usually approaching that sort of phase where their personal expenses have been spent down, another expression we use in aging, and now they need assistance for that last maybe 5, maybe 10 years of their lives. And now I put here, and the denial. The denial is that most of us think that we will not be the ones that need long-term care. Most of us think we'll be that 20% of Americans who don't, or 20 to 30% that don't need long-term care. But even if we're aging at home, aging in place, we will need care and assistance in those final years of life. There we go. Okay, so the issue then becomes planning for long-term care. And as I emphasize in all of my talks on aging, planning and at least having an idea of what your trajectory will be for aging, sharing that with your family and friends and financial advisors, letting people know what your plan is of key importance, because what can often happen is we go into medical crisis, we have a fall, we have some kind of problem with our health, our body, and then we move into the medical system. And if we haven't planned, and if we haven't told people what it is we want, that system can take charge. And then we are not as active. And of course, in terms of quality of life as one ages, having control and knowing what you're going to be doing next, even if you're somewhat impaired, is an incredible, well, actually, it's an incredible help for any kind of impairment that you might encounter, especially cognitive impairment. So long-term care planning starts with you. And when we talk about long-term care, there's no formula for long-term care. It's all about the person. It'll be different for each person. It'll be tailored to your needs. Again, that's that need for planning. Long-term care doesn't start with an institution. We were talking just a little bit earlier, and Rich mentioned the prices of the institutions, but I like to sort of move it out of the institutional realm and not think of institution as much as, okay, how am I gonna age? Like, what am I gonna do? What's the, and of course I need to think about institutions and payment, but what do I want? And so when you're starting to think about long-term care, again, that trajectory, you'll live independently, then you may need assistance. How will that happen? Then you may need more assistance. What if there's cognitive impairment or a major medical diagnosis, a dementia? And, mild cognitive impairment is usually what most of us experience as we age. But things like Alzheimer's or other serious dementias, they are more serious medical conditions as well. And they represent a medical syndrome. So how will you prepare for that? All right. What is long-term care? And here's the visual didn't come out well, but long-term care is variable. And it depends on your need. It could be medical care provided by skilled staff. It could be personal care provided by skilled staff. And I like to, personal care is often, that is administered in what's called an assisted living facility. Now, Quakers have been on the vanguard of long-term care. The Quaker boarding home movement started over 100 years ago. The Hickman, Friends Home in Newtown, these institutions were started in the 1870s, 1880s. The Jeans family, Anatine Jeans. If you go to most of the Quaker assisted living facilities that were at one time personal care boarding homes. So they went from personal care boarding homes to personal care homes to assisted living. And that's all the same type of care. It's congregate care, you're living with others, and you're being assisted in the day-to-day living. So again, housing, household responsibilities, financial support, community environment, and relations. And again, assisted living there's that emphasis on community. But these are the issues when you look at long-term care. You say, okay, so there's medical needs, personal care, housing, where will I live? How will I afford it? And then what's the community that I'm going to be part of? And how do I feel about being part of the community? And one thing that having done this job for almost 13 years now and having done work previously, and we know that Quakers were in the vanguard of what's called the continuing care retirement community movement. And Folkways in Gwinnett was one of the first in America. And when Quakers decided to create Folkways, they didn't do it because they didn't want to be a burden to their children. They did it because they were Quakers and wanted to be in community. So a lot of the Quaker facilities the impetus behind it was, hey, we're aging, we want to be together. And there may have been some desire to not burden one's children, but there's also that spiritual ideal of living in community continuing, so that a lot of the Quaker CCRCs, like Kendall, Folkways, and Pennswood, and Medford Lee's, they have a meeting for worship, they have a pastoral care committee, they have all of the structures that Friends are familiar with. And so that's another issue, is when you age, what about your pastoral care? What about your spiritual life? Spiritual life in aging becomes very important. And one of the things I often talk about is what's called Gerio transcendence. So I hear somebody's not unmuted. I can hear something going on there. So if you could just make sure you're muted. So as I mentioned, long-term care may be provided in a variety of settings. You can do it in one's home. It's called aging in place, or the home of a relative, in a congregate setting. And that could be group independent living, an independent living arrangement. I mentioned Friends Home in Newtown. They also have a village, there's Friends Home and Village. And a village is an independent congregate setting. There's assisted living, and assisted living, again, that's that catch-all for personal care home, or what used to be called a Quaker boarding home. And then it could be in a skilled nursing facility, and then it could include hospice care or palliative care. And while you may decide, okay, I'm living at home, or I'm living with my daughter, you'll still need to think about these settings, because most of us will wind up at some point in hospice or in palliative care as we approach the end of our lives. So I thought it would be real helpful if you had the insider jargon for long-term care speak, as they say. Many of us don't, we kind of put these terms out of our mind because they're not, when we're young and healthy, they're not relevant to our lives. And when I go to speak to meetings, if a meeting invites me to come and speak about aging, as soon as I get my stuff all set up, all the young people, the people under 60, all leave the room. And I don't personalize it because they're not in the frame of mind to think about what is coming. But acute care, when we talk about acute care that's provided in a hospital, subacute care is often what's called rehabilitation. Assisted living, I mentioned that, it's a wide variety. Assisted living facilities are not regulated in the same way that a nursing home or a hospital would be. Most people move into assisted living because they need help with their activities of daily living, the ADLs, the ordinary everyday tasks of living, bathing, cooking, dressing, etc. My mother is 90 years old, and I have helped her through this and on a personal basis, not professionally, although she's happy to have that. But she was living independently until about 88, when cooking just became too much for her, and so she moved to assisted living. And then assisted living will also help with the instrumental activities. And again, that's paying bills, shopping, driving, getting to appointments, and doing that kind of thing. A skilled nursing facility is basically what used to be called a nursing home, and it provides subacute skilled care. So you're not, and the word transfer in long-term care speak, it has two meanings. It could be transfer institutionally, and it also is about personal transfer, one's ability to move about, even with being ambulatory. As one ages, just moving about, doing the daily activities is can be a challenge. The institutional transfer is that during the course of our aging, during the course of our long-term care, we will move from various of these settings as need and circumstances dictate. So then, I give you this overview, and so then it becomes a question of timing. Like the question, why change your current living arrangement? Things are pretty good. Why do that? So being able to assess your needs, knowing when to assess your needs, knowing if you're going to change locations, if you're going to move somewhere other than where you've been living in your early post-retirement. And then how do you remain independent? And it will involve asking for help. So the more help you can ask for of friends and family and professionals and doctors and whomever is there for you, the more you'll take control, and the more you'll be able to feel more competent, but you are going to have to ask for help. Now, how do you assess your needs? That as we age, that takes a lot of humility. It's usually the people around us that are going to assess our needs. And I'll never, I'll share, with when my in-laws were in their, I guess, mid-70s, they said to my wife and I, well, when we're ready, you guys need to tell us. And when they were in their early 80s, we sat down and said, hey, we think it might be time. This big house is, a lot, and other things. And they were highly insulted. They thought we were, we were saying things that we weren't. We were just trying to be helpful. But how are you going to do this assessment? How are you going to know when to move? How are you going to know when, how are you going to put yourself in the hands of another? We've talked earlier, Rich mentioned, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. We're not going to go into that tonight, but all those decisions, what are called end of life decisions, which will need to be moving concurrently as we go through this aging process. So long-term care in different settings, aging in place. Someone said tonight they plan to age in place, so that's great. Continuing care retirement community, I mentioned that, Folkways, Kendall, Crosslands, Longwood, that's a special type of community arrangement. Independent living, assisted living, tiers, and then plus, because assisted living has tiers, and there are price points for each tier. And the tier that you need is determined usually by a social worker who does an assessment of your need. And then there's multi-generational living, co-housing. Some friends have figured out that, one way to stay younger and to have sort of input of others is to live in this congregate co-housing. And then I put here a NORC. A NORC is a naturally occurring retirement community. So these happen more in urban areas where there's an apartment building or there's a neighborhood of people who are aging in place, and they form a community. And there are various institutions that'll help them do that. There's something called Village to Village. There's the village model that came out of Beacon Hill in Boston about 20 years ago. All right. So how will all this get funded? So there's public funding, and most people, when you turn 65, you must apply for Medicare. You don't have to, of course, but if you don't, that you could have some penalties held against you when you do decide to apply if it's after your 65th birthday. Medicaid is, Medicare is a universal system. Everyone that has worked at some point is eligible. Medicaid is a means tested. It's done state by state. But each county has a federally funded Office on Aging, and the Office on Aging also may have funds available, especially Office on Aging does have in-home care, funding for in-home care. So if you're aging in place and you need to have personal care assistance twice a week for 4 hours in the afternoon, the Office on Aging might be able to assist you with some of that funding. And then there's private. So the big private resource for long-term care is long-term care insurance. Now, long-term care insurance, unless you worked for a large corporation, you do have to go out and purchase it. It is not cheap, and it becomes more expensive the older you get, of course. And many people that move into continuing care retirement communities also have long-term care insurance, so that as they move through. Now, the continuing care retirement community is a special community in that you're buying an insurance product, basically. And they're saying to you, okay, you can come in to our community, you can live independently. Of course, we're going to be making assessments of your abilities. You'll then move into assisted living. You'll then move into skilled care. You'll go to hospice, palliative care, and then your life will end. So they're selling you that insurance product that they will be there to take care of you. So if you do have a fall and go to a community hospital and then need some rehab and go to a subacute place, a subacute facility, when you're well, then you go back to your residence at the CCRC. PYM grant making. So I mentioned Aging Assistance Granting Group, Aging Assistance Granting Group. And the Aging Assistance Granting Group oversees a bunch of funds, a lot of little funds. And we'll talk more about that. And then the Greenleaf Granting Group. Now, the Greenleaf Granting Group was established in 2009. I was there on the ground floor for that. And the Haddonfield Quarter in South Jersey had a personal care home like the Hickman in Moorestown, but unlike the Hickman, they decided not to modernize. So the Hickman modernized, moved into personal, you know, personal care through assisted living, um, and they were just around the corner from the Barclay, and the Barclay, which is now part of the Kendall Group, provided the skilled care. So you could go from Hickman, and as your, as your need developed and as you declined, you would then move to Barclay. But so the Greenleaf was a facility. It was sold. It was sold to Moorestown Friends School. It's now an administrative building for the school. But the sale and the endowment were put into a fund, and that fund is available to, as I mentioned, to members. So there's Anna T. Jeans. The Jeans family were actually, I work at Friends Center. That whole corner, that whole block of, or that corner block was purchased by Anna T. Jeans. The Jeans family were involved in the railroads in the mid-19th century. There were 4 Jeans children, none of them married. All of them became philanthropists. So throughout the yearly meeting, you'll see Jeans this and Jeans that. And Anna T. was the one with concern for aging. The Aging Assistance Granting Group makes need-based grants to individuals. Now, this is something that, and the reason I wanted to put all this in the context of long-term care is that when granting groups look at what is being requested, they look at need and what, and I mentioned Medicaid, which is a healthcare for people, and it's also means tested, meaning means, what are your means? What level are they in terms of their degree above or below the poverty base? And then, so the granting group then makes an assessment, and then, and then will either grant or not grant. And members of the granting group appointed by the granting committee, and then I am a staff for that committee. Alrighty. So these are some of the AGG funds. Anna T. Jeans, the biggest, the Stroke Heart, and you'll see this fund came to us through the sale of the Stapley in Germantown, which is no longer under the care of the yearly meeting. We sold it to the Methodists back in, I think, 2010. And this little fund came over with it. But this fund can assist elderly persons living in Friends facilities. Now, these other funds, Inaway Fund, which was a fund that came through with the closure of Friends Hall at Fox Chase, which was also part of Jeans Hospital. All of this is a little bit arcane, but and those funds are often used for someone in skilled care because they come from that Jeans Hospital. And there's the Satterwaith and the Hallowell Fund, the Albertson Fund, the Cadbury, the Shepherd, and Pensbury, and then there's Aging Granting Fund. And these funds, for the most part, the Albertson especially and the Cadbury, they're the biggest, and their language talks about helping friends remain in their own homes. So unlike Stroke Heart, which can be applied for folks living in facilities, the 4 funds, from Albertson down to Pensbury, the language is pretty clear that they're for assisting friends living in their own home. So I just put that out there because there are these precatory restrictions on the money. So how do you apply? See if okay. So Friends, who, as I mentioned, we have also the Aging Granting Group has more flexibility because of the number of funds and the language. And some of the language comes from, of course, the 19th century. But it's a fairly, there's a bit of flexibility there. And friends can apply. You can contact me if you it says contact POM Care and Aging Coordinator. And when I'm gone, there will be an aging coordinator to replace me. And applications can be also made on behalf of family members. And they can be made by the pastoral care committee of the meeting or the retirement community itself, the retirement facility. And that's a unique, allowing, say, the Hickman to make an application directly through the fund for one of its residents is fairly unique. The committee also makes pocket money grants, and those are for friends who are, it's a little dated, that expression, pocket money. And then, there you see there are no deadlines for when to apply. And if you want the aging assistance guidelines, you can find them on on pym.org. Much of the information, not the softer things about long-term care, but the information about the granting groups and the funds and what the folks they're targeted to help, all that information is on our website, pym.org. This is what happens if you, let's see what happens. Oh, there you go. So here we are. This is a PDF on our website. And so it describes the type of grants: monthly, pocket money, individual one-time, monthly, ongoing monthly grants. Grants.
I can't see that.
Oh, you
Okay,
can't? Oh, okay.
that's fine. Okay.
Oh.
And somebody says, can you move the focus of the screen to the left a little more? It's getting cut off, but
Is it?
I don't know what.
All right. Well, I guess I'll.
That may be on their personal screen. If you are on a smartphone or some kind of a device where you can control the screen, you can pinch. You can use 2 fingers to pinch the screen to change your screen. Otherwise, it could just be the view on your device.
Yeah, because mine is perfectly centered. Okay, so the Greenleaf, again, there's a picture of the Greenleaf. The statement of values: the ministry of the Greenleaf Granting Group is guided by values that guided the founding and operation of the former Greenleaf boarding home for more than a century: caring, compassion, confidentiality, respect for all residents of the home. And Alice Paul lived to be 100 years old, and she died at the Greenleaf. And there's a lot of different stories, very spicy, salty stories about Alice Paul living at the Greenleaf. But anyway, many of the homes that were started in the 19th century were started for women who were in the first wave of feminism. So the Hickman was for Quaker schoolmarms who retired, did not marry, did not want to live with family, and then moved into that. So it's interesting, the connection between early feminism and the Quaker boarding home movement. But I won't say anything more about that. So the Greenleaf provides grants and loans to elderly Quakers. So grants and loans. So sometimes people do take a loan against their assets, usually their real estate. And in that way, the Greenleaf has functioned as a reverse mortgage lender. Although we don't do anything involving lawyers. It's all done through letters of understanding and agreement and meeting with family and talking about needs. So we try not to make it legalistic. And those in sympathy with friends who are of modest means. Now there's that modest means, basically the need, the need for assistance. And it's for housing needs, ongoing medical, and then maintenance or living costs. So if you're living in your own home and you have a maintenance need, or you need a new car, or you need to, do something to maintain your current situation. Also, just living costs. All right. So Greenleaf assistance grants are made to individuals only. Greenleaf does not grant to organizations or institutions. Applications are considered according to the following priorities. Quakers who are members of a monthly meeting in Haddonfield Quarter, and that they get first priority. Quakers who are members of another monthly meeting of Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, second priority. And then those who are in sympathy with friends and live in the geographic area defined by Haddonfield Quarterly Meeting or the Yearly Meeting. I should add that. So there is another group under there that includes everyone in the Yearly Meeting. So if you were in sympathy with friends and you decided to move to Oregon, you would not be eligible for the Greenleaf as its language describes it now. But if you were a member of PYM and you moved to Oregon and you were in long-term care and you needed assistance, you could apply to the Yearly Meeting. And actually, we've had a number of people that have decided to relocate in their retirement, maintain their membership in their Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, monthly meeting, and continue to be eligible. So for the purposes of the Greenleaf Fund, in sympathy means, well, non-Quakers who can be a parent, spouse, domestic partners. You can see this language is a little dated. It was written 10 years ago and things have changed. So that there's that. And you can have worked or volunteer a minimum of 5 years in a Quaker organization within the geographic area, again, defined by the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting. Applications for grants from persons in category A, that would be members, are considered before. Now, thus far, the Greenleaf has a lot of income that it generates every year, and it has never turned down anyone that meets the requirements. So it's still underspending. It's okay. All right. So those are questions and answers. I will stop the screen share.
Okay, let's see. George, it looks like we didn't get any questions through the chat. So that means I think if people would like, actually, let me ask a question if you're able to do this. What about Medicaid? I know that that's come up in our discussions in our group quite a bit. People may not understand the process of applying for Medicaid and how you have to spend down your resources. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I can talk a lot about that. Most of us, I have long-term care insurance, but most of us are going to self-insure our long-term care, meaning it's going to come from our savings. And we're going to pay as need arises. We're going to go to our savings and we're going to pay for the care we need. So that means that money is going to be drawn down. It's going to, dwindle. When it dwindles to the point of real close to, let's say, the poverty level in the U.S. and the granting groups, the Greenleaf and Aging, they use a guide of 350% above the poverty line. So everybody knows in America, the poverty line has not been changed since like 1968, some ridiculous thing like that. And so when you talk about need and assessment, it's always about percentages above the poverty line. So Greenleaf is probably going to, given inflation and things that are going on, we're probably going to move it up to 400%. So, but if you are even 200% above the poverty line in terms of your income now because you've spent down your savings, you are eligible for Medicaid. But Medicaid wants you to have spent down your assets. And if you are, many people that apply to Greenleaf, they say, well, I'm not spending on my assets. I'd like to get money from Greenleaf and from Medicaid because I want my assets to go to my children. Now that's not allowable. Only if you plan, say, 7 or 8 years before you know you're going to need Medicaid. If you establish a trust, move your assets into an irrevocable trust, meaning you can't take it, but trustees can. If you don't do that, you will have to spend your money, and most of us will probably at that point be in some kind of skilled care, and the facility will know that you don't have the money to pay, and they will make application to Medicaid. Usually they'll make it for you. Well, they'll bring your family in or your power of attorney and say, okay, given the income, given inflation, given the spending down, given the liquidation of all assets, the person now is putting together a package. So part of that package is their Social Security. That'll never end until they die. If they have a pension, that'll never end until they die. If they have an annuity, that'll never end until they die. And then the difference will be made up by Medicaid. So that's how that would work. I mean, I just gave you the example of how my mother's in skilled nursing care, and that's how her monthly bill is being paid through those 4 payment mechanism. Now, if the annuity gets spent down, Medicaid will pick up that. The Social Security and her pension, will just continue to come into her bank account. I write a check each month for that, for the difference between what Medicaid can pay, what the annuity is paying, and then those other 2 pieces. So most of us, I mean, unless we've, unless for some unfortunate reason we've become impoverished, most of us will use Medicaid as an add-on to help with the package that the nursing home needs in order to provide the care. So that's the Medicaid story. And Medicaid does, if you have, like my mother had some considerable liquid assets, and the nursing home, they did an analysis and they said, okay, so there's $30,000 here that if you don't spend it, Medicaid will take it. And the only way you can spend it, as I could spend it as her son and my brothers and I, we created funeral arrangements for ourselves through an irrevocable trust. So all of I'm going to be buried in a pine box in Laurel Hill West Cemetery in Philadelphia, overlooking the Schuylkill River and the expressway. And it's all paid for, but it was paid for through the spending down of my mother's final assets, and that was allowable under Medicaid. And so that's how Medicaid will work for most of us.
George, just a follow-on question. Can we count on, if we move into a facility, that there will be a social worker at the facility who will understand this process and kind of shepherd us through? Is that something we should assume?
You can, if you're in a Quaker facility, you can absolutely assume it. If you're in any facility, you can absolutely assume it because they want to get paid. You're going to be in a private, for the most part, you want to be in a private nursing facility. You don't want to be in a public facility. And unless you were an impoverished person, I don't want to, denigrate the public facilities. But if you've been going through these steps as I've described them, you'll probably be in, say, if you're in a CCRC, but you'll probably have enough money to move into nursing care and afford it for a few years. if you have insurance or self-insuring. But then you'll have spent it down, and then, you know, most nursing homes will keep you. They're not going to, they're not going to show you to the curb. They'll keep you, and they're going to want to get paid, and so they will apply for. Yeah, I just was working with somebody who the nursing home didn't really know what her assets were, because she had come in an acute situation, went into the rehab, then back to the nursing, and they went ahead and applied for the person, and it got approved, and the person had assets, and so it had to be given back. But yeah, they're not going to be shy about applying, because they want to get their money.
Okay, great, George. Thank you. I have another question here in the chat, but I just want to point out that Lynn put out on the chat that the current poverty guidelines for a family of four is 26,005 or 12,880 for one person, 17,420 for two.
Right. So
And eligibility would be 200% above that, I guess, right?
right. So if you do the math, if you work back from Lynn's figures and do the math for a single person, that means that the Greenleaf guidelines and yearly meeting granting aging guidelines are about $36,000 to $38,000 a year. So if you're in your retirement, if you've spent down and now you have an income of about 36,000, you're eligible for Greenleaf and aging. So because we're about 350% above that for an individual, which comes out to approximately 34.5 or something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you, George. Here's a question, and you might want to take this time to kind of put in what we were talking about before we came on. Are you aware of financial assistance or help offered by the Quaker CCRCs or any other quarters?
Yeah, sure. Abington Quarter, my quarter, had a personal care boarding home, Quaker personal care boarding home in Norristown, and it closed and sold that. And so Abington Quarter has what's called an Abington Care and Aging Fund, and it's open to all members of the quarter. The many of the funds, many of the long-term care facilities that are Quaker have a Quaker residence fund, but it's not used to get in. You couldn't say, hey, I understand you guys have a Quaker assistance fund, I'd like to use it to get in. It's used once you're in. So once you're in, and as you're aging and spending down, then that fund will kick in. And and they all have. I mean, Medford Lee's, Folkways, they all have. I'm not sure. I mean, so 20 years ago, there were a lot of providers in the field of assisted living, like there were providers in nursing care. And then as things have corporatized, the number of small places have dropped out. They've been subsumed under larger corporations. As Quakers, we're kind of lucky that one of the winners has been Kendall Corporation. So Kendall's now a national player, and they've got facilities, and they're still a Quaker organization, Quaker founded, and they do try to abide by the principles and the former, there were Quakers in our yearly meeting. Lewis Brown, some of you may remember him. He was out at Kendall, the Brown family. So we, Quakers did we do have a national presence in Kendall Corporation, but our other facilities are mostly located in this area and out on the West Coast. There are a few. Now, if you're interested in knowing what the Quaker facilities are, there is an association called Friends Services for the Aging. And you can Google FSA info, info.org, and their website will come up and you can get a complete listing of all the Quaker affiliated. And what Quaker affiliated means, there's no, we're not a pyramid hierarchy. But what it means is that the Quaker values will be practiced, and that at least 50% of the board members will be Quaker. So that's when we call an institution these days that is an independent institution. What we're really talking about is the board. That the board, that at least 50% of board members have some kind of Quaker affiliation. Most places require them to be members. They will make an exception for an attender who brings a special expertise. So, but like the Quaker schools, like our Quaker schools, I think Folkways has the most Quakers, the largest number of Quaker residents. And then there are varying degrees and of Quaker presence. But one of the things that's interesting, speaking of the last question, Quakers need pastoral care in aging. And Pennswood Village, which is, on the campus of George School, there's a large Presbyterian group there. They were unhappy that there was no chaplain. And so they hired a Presbyterian chaplain to come in. And, there's a Quaker presence there, but it may not be that the folks that are there are the folks that have provided pastoral care at their meeting. So, so sometimes a Quaker long-term care community, CCRC, will welcome someone with a strong pastoral care background that can provide that kind of ministry to the group. So we're it's a unique situation that we started these groups, as I mentioned earlier. These long-term care facilities were started with a spiritual incentive, a spiritual motive, but then that generation passed away, and sustaining our spiritual life. And many people, I remember going to Pennswood Village, and they had a problem. Pennswood Village had a problem after 2010 and then the 2012 financial crisis, because they started marketing to New York City and other large urban areas. And people were coming and not knowing that there was a Quaker institution and saying, well, why are we having this moment of silence before dinner? And they'd say, well, that's our way of, that's Quaker grace, as my son would say. We stare at our plates in silence for a few minutes before we eat. That's a little joke, but there was no one. So that culture, the Quaker culture, how we do pastoral care, the communal aspect of our spirituality, that is something that needs to be kept alive, in my opinion. And if you do go to as I always suggest, if there's a community that interests you, go there, find out, talk to people, have lunch. Don't let the fact that the price fee structure might look out of your range. Go there, talk to people. Let them know what you bring. Let them know that you're a Quaker. Let them know that this is a Quaker institution. You're a Quaker. This is where you belong. And, you might not be able to afford it, but, talk, negotiate. I said earlier to Rich, oftentimes, especially with CCRCs, it's kind of like buying a car. You negotiate. Like, what's the state of your health? How long do you think you'll live? What kind of assets do you have? What's your family arrangement? So you really need to explore all of these things. And then, of course, will you like it there? Now, the personal inventory that I often, if you're an introvert who likes to read and be alone, being in a CCRC might not be your cup of tea, or because there are, activities, and it's a different kind of, it's like, it's like college. It's like CCRCs are like, there are lectures, there are trips, there are all kinds of things going on. And, so you should explore and talk to people, get to know the community, get to know what you're doing. The other thing is, if you're going to age in place, you probably don't want to relocate somewhere. Like if you're a young retired person, you might want to go to Boulder, Colorado. But the older you get, your network of support, your community, your doctors, your lawyer, your accountant, all that stuff, you want to have that stuff accessible. You don't want to move when you're in your late 70s to Boulder and start to have to make all those connections. And I know of some very unfortunate situations where, people always had a dream in their retirement they would go to some remote place, and now they're in a remote place and they're retired and they don't have many friends. They're enjoying the scenery, but their social supports and their community are not there to wrap around them, and that's going to be really important. And especially, the other thing I should mention is that, if you are going to age in place, that your meeting community is going to be a very important part of your life. So.
Great. Just a minute, Gary, I'll call on you in a second. George, one important point we were discussing before, and people may not be aware of it, that it may be a buyer's market when you actually go to the director of admissions at a specific place. Do you want to just talk briefly about that? I thought that was a good point you made.
Well, as I mentioned, as Rich mentioned, I was a personal care administrator, licensed by the state. And so that business model depends on the number of beds that are occupied. So the number of beds that are occupied, that's the income that I'm going to get to run my facility. So if there's a downturn in the real estate market and everybody decides to stay put and not sell their houses and move into assisted living, then because the other thing is, just to be very clear about the whole thing, is people are dying all the time in facilities. They're going there, and that's the last move that you're going to make. You're not going to say, okay, well, maybe I'll go do this, and that's it. You're there, and then you're going to die. So as people die, beds become available. If people are not willing to come in for some reason because of a downturn in the market, then my occupancy starts to go down, and I start to panic, and then I offer people discounts. Say, hey, come on in. We're going to waive the down payment. We're going to waive that for you, or we're going to cut it by 50%. You may have heard, maybe more like 6 years ago, when people were holding on. Now, the interesting thing that's happened in long-term care is, so the age for someone to enter Folkways 50 years ago was 67, because men died at 72 and women died at 74. So now people are coming into long-term care in their early 80s. That's the average age now, is early 80s. But it's interestingly, I remember when Folkways had to repave all of its walkways, and they found that no one was using their tennis courts because it wasn't 67-year-olds coming in to play tennis. It was 85-year-olds coming in who had no interest in playing tennis. So, so demographics, what's happening financially, when are people moving in, all of those variables have to be factored into, as an administrator, they would be factored into my pricing. So I guess the point that Rich and I made earlier, I made to Rich earlier, is a lot of these variables they like all good variables, they vary. So don't be dissuaded if something seems out of reach at the time.
Okay, great. I'd like to open it up to questions. Gary had his hand up first and then David Leonard. So Gary, I'm going to let you go. And then David, I'll get to you.
George, you mentioned co-housing as an option for aging. I wonder if you have some examples in the PYM area of successful co-housing that includes a substantial group of older folks.
Well, the successful Quaker co-housing that I've experienced is in Berkeley, California. There's one in Mount Airy, and people have been talking for years about doing it in West Philadelphia, but they're very hard. The only co-housing groups that work have a unifying spiritual basis. So there are a lot of Zen groups do it, Quaker groups do it, but you have to get everybody to agree on, it's interesting. I was talking to a young person about conflict resolution, and they said, yeah, but if the other party doesn't agree that they want to resolve the conflict, then you can't do that. I was like, exactly, exactly. That's the catch. It's like, that's why, the Alternatives to Violence program talks about community building. So the ability to build community, to have a common ethos with which to resolve disputes is really important with co-housing. But you can Google co-housing, and if you email me, I can send you some resources on co-housing. But co-housing, it takes a lot of energy. I should put it that way.
George, it's just one of those things that's, we're settled in Kendall now, so this is not a personal issue, but it's something that's always seemed incredibly appealing to me as an option, but I just haven't seen it happen very well.
Yeah.
Okay. David, you can go ahead and ask your question. If anybody else wants to ask a question, use that hand raising feature in Zoom. In Zoom, and we'll call on you.
First a comment and then my question. The comment is, one of the advantages of a CCRC is that it's a perpetually rejuvenating community. In other words, people die, but also people continue to come in. And as you get older outside of a CCRC, everybody that you know starts dying, and in the end, you have no social circle left any longer. And so it's something to, anyway, my question is, George has told us he's retiring, but he hasn't told us how on earth, is his successor known? And how on earth do we get in touch with his successor when we don't know the name or even the title or the email address or whatever? In other words, please give us how we get in touch with your successor, George.
Yeah, I will. I think the yearly meeting is about to, any day now, it's going to publish the job description, and then they'll start to, hopefully bring applicants in. But if I'm, if that person is not named by the end of the year, you can always contact me, and I can.
Is there a generic email for your position, George? No,
there isn't. No, there isn't.
Okay.
That's a good point, David. I'm gonna put that down.
Yeah, just that I know I'm here on behalf of other people who weren't capable to be here tonight, and they will need to be in touch with you.
Right. Now, the other person, that I work with on the granting side is Nicholas Gutowski. And
Nick, could you put that on the chat so I don't, or spell it out loud?
I'll put it in the chat for all. And Nick is You know, Nick was a student with my daughter at Germantown Friends School, so he's only 33 years old. And he's going to be available. So Nick would be the person at least to get you connected to the person who's going to be doing mine.
Great. And I think Nick's contact information is up on the PYM website under granting groups. He is the director of granting, right?
Yeah, Nick is the director of grant making. So Nick assumed the position that Carol Walls had. Nick was the associate director of grant making and then became. Yeah, there he is. And Gutowski.
Bianca, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, slightly change of topic, but not really. Just a little bit more, George, I would love to hear what your favorite part of your position has been. And if there has been an experience that you'd like to share in which you did an event like this, or just bestowed your wisdom upon friends that you can share with the group.
Well, the greatest part of the job is calling people and telling them that they got their grant. You know, that's and telling people that you know, it's like that old show, you know, The Millionaire, who went around giving out checks, you know. So that's great. I enjoy doing the retreats. The retreats are, you know, this topic is, you know, very extensive, and tried to cover it, you know, using specific things, but the, you know, end of life decision making and you know, these other topics really involve a lot of reflection. So doing the retreat, meetings are advised in Faith and Practice to once every other year to talk as a meeting about aging and how the meeting can support it. So I guess another satisfactory, you know, thing that's very satisfying is to be in the Quaker stream of this work, which, as I mentioned, has been going on now for more than 100 years. So thanks for that question, Bianca.
Yeah, I think that makes a nice segue to end. George, I think I speak for all of us in saying this was a wonderful gift that you've given us before you leave the yearly meeting. We hope to see you around, and we pray that you have a blessed retirement. So,
Thank you all so much. It's great being here.
all right, friends. God bless everyone. See you.
Bye. See you.